By the end of Esther chapter 5, the Jews are threatened with complete annihilation. Haman has received the consent of the king that in about 11 months' time a day will be devoted to the extermination of the Jewish people. Esther herself, as a Jewess, though the queen is herself in danger, and despite her prayerful and careful plans, her uncle Mordecai is in danger of death the following morning. So has God forgotten his promises to his people and his world? It was through the Jewish people that the Messiah was to come. Are those promises now at an end? Is God's plan for his world something that has now been thwarted by this evil man, Haman? Well, that's the question, I think, that we're intended to bring to this 6th chapter of Esther that we're studying together this morning. And we begin to see God's answer. For lying behind this chapter is surely the one who controls the events of this world. Now, possibly as a result of the worries of high office, or the consequence of overindulgence at the party that he's just had with the queen, or perhaps most likely Xerxes wondering what on earth Esther's going to ask for at the forthcoming party. The king can't sleep. Now, some of you I know find it helpful when you can't sleep to put the light on and read something. And the more boring the thing you read, the more likely you are to fall asleep. Well, one can imagine nothing perhaps more tedious to read than the detailed accounts of Xerxes' reign. This happened on such and such a day. This was done on this or that occasion. So Xerxes resolves that in order to overcome his insomnia, he will get somebody to read the annals of his reign. The ruse doesn't work. Indeed, the problem is that he is suddenly made very, very awake by the reminder that an attempt had been made on his life. You might nod off when you're listening to other accounts of details of your life, but you'll suddenly be awakened when the story is told again, the painful story of an attempt on your life. And so it proved for Xerxes. So we discover he is now wide awake and asks the question, what has been done to this man Mordecai who revealed the plot against my life? Now, if you know anything about English medieval history, you'll know that it was designed in such a way that there were lords and ladies, and then a various structure down to the likes of you and me, who were the serfs and servants and so on and so forth. But the whole society was based upon patronage and reward. So if I did something for my lord, in order for my lord to establish that ongoing relationship with me, I would be rewarded for what I had done. That was how it was organised, and that was how Persian society was organised too. In order to demonstrate the cohesion of society, this sort of arrangement ran from the king right down to the humblest member of society in the Persian Empire. And so for someone not to have been rewarded for having saved the king's life, this was a major failing in the administration at Susa. Now, we're not told why it was that Mordecai had been overlooked. Perhaps it was because he was Jewish and there was anti-Jewish feeling within the capital of the empire, and there's some evidence of that, I think, within the book as a whole. But whatever the reason, Mordecai had not been rewarded, and so the king resolves to put the matter right. Now, by now we know that Xerxes never does anything without talking to somebody else about it. He seems incapable of making a decision on his own. And so he determines that he will consult At which point, when he asks who is waiting to undertake business for the day, he discovers his friend the Prime Minister is already there. Now, it's an interesting question to ask why it was that Haman felt he could come into the king's presence without any threat, whereas Esther had to wait for the sceptre to be extended to her. Perhaps that reflects the fact that the relationship between Esther and Xerxes was on rocky grounds at that point, but partly because Haman was now the king's favourite. And there are plenty of examples in British and other history where something similar has happened. So Haman clearly thinks that he can enter perhaps quite freely into the king's presence. And once the king knows that Haman's waiting, he didn't occur to him, I don't suppose to selfish people it does. It never occurred to him why Haman was there. So Haman never gets the chance to make his request, because the king is far more preoccupied with his own question. How should I honour the person whom I have identified deserves honour? Now, of course, he doesn't mention the name, and Haman, being a selfish sort of person, assumes it must be him, as such people invariably do. So when this request is made, as one of the commentators I read said, we discover that the ego has landed. Now Haman has apparently all that he's ever wanted. Now, what he suggests is actually outrageous. In Persian society, to ask to suggest that one wore a garment that had previously been worn by the king, to sit upon a horse that previously the king had sat on, was tantamount to saying, I want royal power. I want the authority that goes with being a prince. Indeed, I want a share in that divinity that the king is believed to possess. So this is an incredible request that Haman is making to the king. And of course what he wants is that to be demonstrated in full view of all the population of Susa, including those in high office. Look, I am next to the king himself. I'm second only to him. I am now embraced, as it were, into the royal family of the king. But of course, the occasion of Haman's overreaching of himself becomes the setting for his sudden fall. The whole story is laced, isn't it, with irony as you read through it. It's almost slapstick if it wasn't so funny, or rather tragically funny. So it is that Haman quickly realizes that it is not he who is going to be honoured, but the person who he is planning in just a few hours' time to place upon the gibbet. And so we can almost imagine the scene, can't you? As Haman leads Mordecai, dressed royally, upon the king's horse through the city of Susa. The workmen who are building this gibbet stop and look, as the very one for whom they're building the gibbet is honoured by the king throughout the city. It's not surprising, I think, that we're told that Haman rushed home with his head covered. One of the characteristic means of showing grief, perhaps also not wanting to be seen. And his friends are not particularly helpful, are they? His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. They're already saying, well, it's nothing to do with us. It's your problem. 24 hours or less before, they've been encouraging him to destroy Mordecai, but now suddenly they back off, although, as we shall see, they suffer the consequences of Mordecai's fall. And so, by the end of the chapter, Mordecai, who has been in danger of death at the end of chapter 5, is saved and given royal honour, although he merely returns to the king's gate. It's only a temporary honour. He's not given any high status. It's just he's been recognised for what he's done. He goes back to where he was before. But Haman's fall has commenced. Mordecai is saved, but of course the bigger question still stands. What's going to happen to the Jewish people as a whole? Mordecai might be saved for today, but what's going to happen in 11 months' time? Well, that's the point at which our story ends this morning. So what's the lesson that we should learn from it? Well, it would be easy to say, I suppose, that one of the lessons is pride comes before a fall. And boy, doesn't this story demonstrate that that's true. Here is a man of overweening pride, and his fall is sudden and complete, as we shall see in the following chapter. But surely there's more at work in this chapter than simply an illustration of what often is the case, that those who set high ambitions for themselves or for selfish reasons find themselves cast out and cast down. We sometimes sing at Christmas time, don't we? How silently the wondrous gift is given. While all the normal routine activities of the day and the night are taking place in Bethlehem, silently, although accompanied in that case with angels, silently God began his work of salvation. Here there is no angels, there is no visitation to shepherds, but surely the same God is still to be seen at work, silently, anonymously, achieving his purposes despite the ambitions and the overweening confidence of men and women to destroy his purposes and plans. And the thing is that God can oversee a person's insomnia, a person's choice of reading matter, the very details of a person's life, to ensure that his purposes are fulfilled. One of the stories I love way back in the book of Genesis is that the promises of God hang on a thread, because we know, if we know the story, that there is a famine coming. There's a famine coming that will hit the land of Palestine, where the family of Jacob are living, and the possibility is that they will be completely eliminated by the famine. And yet God has promised that through their descendants the Messiah will come. And if you read through the book of Genesis carefully, what you come across is the story of Joseph and the fact that he is sent by his father to find his brothers. We know, of course, that they're going to sell him into slavery in Egypt, and that's actually going to save them from extinction. But there's a little phrase in there in which we're told that Joseph couldn't find his brothers, but he bumps into somebody who says, I heard them say they were going to Dothan. Now, but for that conversation, the whole purposes and plans of God for the descendants of Jacob would appear to be threatened with total extinction. But God was working in that coincidence in the life of Joseph, as he's working in this apparent coincidence here. So God can take the very individual and the apparently bizarre elements of lives like yours and mine, and he can weave his purposes through it. He's not overcome by these things. He achieves his purposes through all things, from the little to the great. He can work anonymously, even where we are unaware that he's at work, in things that we don't hardly think have anything to do with his sphere. There he can be at work for you and for me and for our fellowship and our world. So the question we ought to bring, I guess, at the end of this study is to say, what are the promises that God has made to me? What are the promises that he's made to us as his people here at Ferndale? What are the promises that he's made to his church? And with what confidence can we go forward into this new year? Confident that he will perform those things that he's promised. Because the most powerful of men and the most fortuitous of circumstances are not outside his ability to weave his purposes in them. His word is secure, his promises remain, and nothing stands in the way of our God and his plans for you and for me, for our church, for our community and our world. Let's pray together. Strengthen our confidence, our Father, we pray, in your promises to us. Enlarge our trust. Make us stronger in our hope that those things you have spoken to us will be fulfilled, whatever the world might throw up against us, and whatever the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So be with us, we ask, and go with us into the coming days as people of confidence and hope, for we ask it for Jesus' sake. Amen.